In the first segment, I talked about the role of the mediator, or the value of mediation, the difference between in-person and a virtual mediation. In this particular segment, I want to talk about some of the tools and the process that mediators use. From a tool perspective, again, what the mediator is there to do is find, again, the needs that both parties need to have met in order to resolve a dispute or a disagreement they have. One of the things that they use, which I call the helicopter view, is that if the mediator is able to get the parties to think from a perspective that if they were in a helicopter, hovering over themselves, if you will, and looking at the dispute, they would probably see things that you cannot see when you're in the midst of a dispute. It's sort of like seeing the forest. Sometimes the saying is you can't see the forest because of the trees. So taking that helicopter view, which is what the mediator does, and helping the parties see that, is a way to look at issues from a different perspective that maybe they're not able to see effectively. But also I would add a third element here, which is the personality, the position, and the interest. And what the mediator is able to do is help the parties see that maybe there are sometimes hindrances that are coming up based on the person's personality or the position they're espousing, which automatically triggers a response, which may be negative or disagreeing, without really taking the time to understand what is the interest that's driving the position and to being able to overcome the story that's around the personality. And what a good mediator will be able to do is to break that down, or help the parties break that down, to see and ask some questions to uncover the interest, meaning why are they asking for what they want, and to help the parties get over this idea that they may have a story about the other person in terms of personality, and to be able to separate that in a way that they can come out with a mutual gain outcome. So that's another key tool that the mediator brings. The mediator is also, as I mentioned, able to help the parties understand the stories or the perceptions or the assumptions they have about each other, and to try to address those in a way that they do not become a blockage to move forward in terms of resolving the dispute. Another tool the mediator uses is I call the what if. And that's just a question to ask at different points in the process. What if we did X, Y, Z versus where we are right now? It's a way to explore possibilities for other options to resolve whatever dispute is there without having the parties commit to any particular position. So it preserves their position, and it allows the parties to have exploration discussions around possibilities that they may not see available at this point in time. And the key around that, what the mediator brings, is the right timing in terms of asking those questions and to manage the process. In fact, I look at the mediator in a sense like a symphony conductor that you would, at times bring in the wind instruments, the trombone, the drums, etc. It's all about when you manage the process effectively to get the outcome that's desired. And that's what the mediator, through his or her experience, is able to do. The other thing I've done sometimes for myself in mediation is to ask the parties to think about what an ideal situation would look like for them. And then to think about how they would have to implement that, or have the other side think about how they'd have to implement that, assuming they had to agree to that. Now, the idea there is not necessarily to have them agree carte blanche to the other side's position, but to get them to think through, again, possibilities, different ways of looking at things if they did have to agree to the other side's position. Another tool the mediator uses is in a labor management context would be called a caucus, but a timeout, a private meeting, if you will, separating the parties, exploring with them informally when they're separate from each other so they don't have to posture a position in terms of their position with each other. Possibilities, again, exploring those possibilities privately with them. And again, that needs to be managed from a timing perspective also. Another tool that the mediator uses is one that I learned way back when I did this, when I was doing labor mediation many years ago in my first career, is to listen with the third ear. And in fact, I think about it from a third ear and a third eye perspective, meaning third eye, what am I observing that they are not seeing of each other? And third ear, what am I hearing beyond the words? What is the intonation of the words in terms of the messages they're conveying? What are they saying and not saying? What is the body language around their facial expressions when they say it? All that's third ear, in a sense, to pick up signals. And many times in a dispute, people send signals to each other that they miss. And one of the advantages of the mediation process is the mediator can pick up those signals and help the parties understand what they mean, and to look at the timing process to see when an offer should be made, not made, when a meeting should happen, not happen, et cetera, based on the signals the mediator is hearing. So let me talk a little bit also about the process of mediation, especially in a corporate environment. If it were two executives or two teams, the first thing I would do is to meet with them separately, give them an opportunity to explain and position or to the challenges, the way they see the issues, what is the dispute about, what are they looking to get out of it, et cetera. And they can do that very comfortably in a separate meeting with me. Once I understand both sides' perspectives and positions, what I will do sometimes is either bring them together just to reconfirm that, because sometimes if you don't reconfirm what they think they have a dispute about, sometimes I've had situations where they have a different perception about what the dispute is about. So I think it's important from the beginning to make sure they're on the same page as to what the disagreements are about. Now, I might do this joint meeting. Another thing I've done is after I've met with them separately, sometimes I'll do some interviews with some key stakeholders, either before or after that joint meeting, to get a perspective of how this dispute is playing out with the people they are interacting with and have to influence, because that's an important element of the process, because they need to see it's not just about the two individuals or the two teams or the two divisions or whatever it might be. It's what's the impact of that on others in the organization. And it's important for them to know how that's being seen. And then once that's done, then I would have it in that joint meeting, we'd have a real knockout, drag out session, if you will, sometimes, but really have an honest discussion about what the issue is that is preventing, or issues that are preventing them from moving forward. And I remember one situation once where two executives, financial executives in a company, had reached that point after they got the feedback on how that was being played out, and we had the joint meeting. They found out that it was an incident that occurred that triggered this whole thing, where somebody thought, again, their good intent was they were trying to help the other person out because they weren't in the office that day by making some decisions. The other person resented that, but never really communicated that to the person who made those decisions. And once they cleared the air around that issue, it changed the dynamic significantly, but they needed to get that story out on the table. They needed to talk about it and understand the context that their dysfunctionality, if you will, was affecting others. It wasn't just their own situation that was involved here. And then once an agreement is reached, obviously we would codify that and have a clear understanding what that is, and commitments would be made to each other in terms of living up to that. And then I would usually follow up with 2 or 3 calls or meetings, could be separately, could be jointly, depending on the situation, with each party over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, just to make sure they're tracking in the right direction in terms of the agreement they reached. So that is typically the kind of process. Now, it's not cast in concrete. There could be changes to that. It all depends. Every situation is ad hoc, if you will. But those are some of the things that typically happen in a process of mediation. So the value of mediation ultimately is that it does provide a forum to resolve disputes that are preventing individuals, teams, or other parties from moving forward in terms of meeting business objectives. And it can be combined with coaching and other sorts of intervention, like working with teams and so forth. But it is a process that can be transferable to the extent as once people go through it, they understand what it is. It can help them then resolve disputes on their own the next time around without necessarily having to use a third-party intervention.